Hey everybody, it's good to see you all back once again. So work on X231 has been quite tedious lately. For the hours I've been putting in the shop, I have not been able to generate a lot of video minutes, and that's all right. I expected that to happen in the phase that we're in right now. So I've been holding another storytelling episode kind of in my back pocket for just such an occasion, and I believe the time is right. We will delve into this archive photo of the X253 prototype crawler. I mentioned at one point that there was quite a lot going on with all the suits that were arranged around X253 in this archive photo. This was taken in 1956, all right? And this sparked the crawler evolution for the Minneapolis Moline Company. It took until 1958 to come out with the production two-star crawler, and that's what these scale models are right here. They only built 51 units total of the two-star just in 1958. So even to find a two-star is rather rare, and this is as close as I have got to owning any of them. So to find one or to have bought one, just a bare drawbar tractor like this would have been an anomaly back in the day. I believe the majority were outfitted with the dozer blade, or as you can see here, the loader bucket. So they definitely had more of an industrial design than the old agricultural design, which incidentally is what X253 started out as, with the 3-point hitch still on the back and all of that. But as promised, we will delve into the story of all of the people that are standing here on this crawler. And it's been quite a few years since I've had to think much about what is going on in that old picture, so I've brushed up on all my notes. I've got all the details straight. But disclaimer right off the bat, what I am about to tell is meant to be taken as entertainment only. It is not meant to be factual statements. I was not there. I did not know those people. All of this has been put together through conversations and consulting with historians and stories that have been relayed to me verbally. So if any living relative of any individual that I talk about in this photo has any kind of a problem with the stories I'm about to tell, I will set the record straight or even take the original episode down if need be. Now that we've got everything covered, this is their story. So, as it happened, this picture was taken very shortly after the end of a proxy war that had raged within the upper levels of Minneapolis Moline for control of the company for the prior 1 to 2 years. So there were a lot of tensions between the Minneapolis Moline people that were here. Some in this picture had just been bumped down a notch or 3 and were not very happy about it at all. But in a nutshell, Mr. W.C. McFarland Sr. right here emerged victorious. He is president and chairman of Minneapolis Moline at this time, and his son, Wayne H. McFarland, happens to be vice president. And these two men had very different ideas for the direction that they wanted the Minneapolis Moline Tractor Company to go. And it can be speculated that this sudden branch out into a crawler tractor segment was largely driven by their agendas. So other Minneapolis Moline higher-ups in this picture, moving on from Wayne H. McFarland, we have just behind him Stacy Angle right here. He was the acting treasurer for Minneapolis Moline at this time. And then this gentleman with the glasses back here is H.M. Morgan. He was the Lake Street Assembly Plant manager. So you would have this guy being able to promise certain manufacturing quotas to everyone with a financial venture such as this on the line. And we also have the money man for the company would also be here to assure every outside investor that things were well in hand and we are ready to proceed as long as everyone decides to give it a green light. Moving on now, behind Mr. President W.C. McFarland, we have this gentleman. That is Henry S. Rettig. And Henry and W.C. were in direct competition with one another for control of the company. And W.C. actually bumped Henry down a few notches. Henry wanted to be standing where this man is right here. So to say the least, relations were frosty between these two men in this picture. Another Rettig connection is this gentleman right here. This is Robert R. Greenwalt. He is the son-in-law of Henry S. Rettig and assistant sales manager for the entirety of Minneapolis Moline. So I don't know what official capacity Henry was in at this point in time, but he was still high up enough with the company to be featured in this very prominent meeting. And to expand upon the Rettig name even further in this picture, so Henry S. is high-level management, Minneapolis Moline. This is Henry's brother, Edward S. Rettig. He was a CPA, And plot twist here, at this time was also acting treasurer for White Motor Corporation. And that's huge because this is 1956 right here, okay? And 7 years later, in 1963, White Motor Corp bought out the Minneapolis-Moline Company in its entirety. So what was White Motor Corp money already doing inside of Minneapolis-Moline back in 1956? Obviously, Henry was still high enough up in the company, he had considerable pull and got his brother involved with this crawler program and who knows what else. But even though Henry lost out to W.C. McFarland for control of the company in 56, well, one could say maybe the Rettigs were just better at playing the long game. Those guys won in the end. And the final Minneapolis-Moline guy in the picture is right here, Mr. Ed Henry. And I saved him for last out of all the Minneapolis-Moline higher-ups because he's got a rather interesting story too. At this time, he was overall head of manufacturing across all the plants for the company, and he was quite sharp when it came to business. Okay, so just not long after this picture was taken, Mr. Henry did decide to retire from Minneapolis-Moline, but when he went, he worked a deal with the company that the entire value of his retirement package, which was a sizable amount, would be paid to him in the form of Minneapolis-Moline Model 605 power unit engines at cost with no markup. All right, and this literally translated to train loads of power unit engines. He had them all shipped to the Bakersfield, California area and then had them fitted to water and oil pumping units, which he then went into business renting out. And it's estimated the profits from this venture easily made him 10 to 20 times the amount of money he would have had if he just would have taken the regular retirement package. And in fact, after leaving Minneapolis-Moline, he had ambitions of getting into the diesel engine market himself and literally giving Caterpillar, Cummins, and Detroit all a run for their money. And he got as far as building a multi-million-dollar assembly plant and began putting together engineering and design teams when, for some unknown reason, all the plans just fell apart and the entire venture was abandoned. And what happened with Mr. Henry after that, far as I know, is lost to history. So that does it for the company men. Now the remaining suits around here are the outside money guys. So these were the ones that we were putting on the whole show for. We'll begin with this guy right here. That is J. Pat Lannon. He was a pretty well-known Chicago investment tycoon, all right, and another ironic part, the gentleman at the controls is E.M. Newland, and he was a pretty powerful Chicago banker. So both these guys came from the same turf, and I've heard several stories about each one of them always trying to beat each other to the punch, undercut one another. There were enough bad deals that had went down between those two that the fact that they're both in the same picture is kind of impressive in and of itself. But apparently Mr. Newland was talking a little bit better game than Mr. Lannon because Newland got to sit at the controls, and little chance he knew what any of those levers even did. But, you know, top dog gets to play with all the toys. And finally, the last gentleman in the picture, this is Mr. H.M. Bellisby right here. He was the big money man from back east. He was a bond buyer, an investment banker, and he was the well-connected guy that had all of the friends in high places. He was aligned with politicians. He was aligned with unions. He was aligned with certain banking systems. And it is said that if you were ever to cross him with the right phone call, he could have, say, your power shut off or your water cut off, or depending on where you banked, an account or two frozen. Not that he always would, but it is said that he could if he wanted. So we'll just leave it at that. So I guess some things about big business never change. When you look at all the agendas going on here and all the backstories and everything that's happening, these guys are all working the system. It's just classic big business. You know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So it was about this time upper management within Minneapolis-Moline really started making some short-term gain but long-term loss decisions. They really mismanaged the whole company right into the ground. And every time there was an internal struggle and someone new would take the helm, the company was just changing direction without even really knowing exactly where they were at that time. And when you start doing things like that, the end is not far off. And of course, it was a perfect storm of many different things that were going on that led to the ultimate downfall. But one of the bigger ones was in the late 1950s, Minneapolis-Moline had the opportunity to buy up some surrounding real estate to expand operations, and they passed on every one of them. And late 1950s, early 1960s, tractors and machinery were starting to get bigger, so the infrastructure that builds this stuff has to keep pace and get bigger as well. So it wasn't long after they realized they'd messed up, because they were boxed in, so they couldn't expand, but they could not afford to relocate either. And the writing was really on the wall. And then by 63, the whole deal with White Motor Corp buying them out finally came to fruition. And another really bad thing that came of that was when White purchased Minneapolis-Moline, they absorbed the employee pension program as an asset. So all of the employee pension contributions and matching funds literally disappeared overnight. And that was a really bad thing for the majority of the workers there. Of course, all the higher up execs pretty much got out with their golden parachutes. They made sure they were covered, but everybody else pretty much was sold right down the river. And Senior and I went to the Rockford, Minnesota Minneapolis-Moline employee reunion get-togethers a few years, about the time, this was early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, about the time I was researching for X253, and we spoke to several of those former employees back then, and there were still some really hard feelings against all of the former management and against White Motor Corp for the way all that shook out, and understandably so. These people had been building accounts and retirements the whole time they worked there, and then it just disappeared. So that was some really bad stuff. But getting back to the X253 prototype, so here's a more modern view of it, and a few key design similarities between the prototype and the production 2-star, a few stark differences as well. First similarity is styling. So they retained that 445 tractor hood and top piece. They got rid of that cross grill at the front, and they went with that hard nose instead. Otherwise, it has that same 445 arched hood with side panels. And like I said earlier, X253 was still set up primarily as an ag machine. It's got the 3-point hitch on the back along with the drawbar. And the 2-stars kept the drawbar, but they got rid of the 3-point agricultural features. And what they did instead is they kind of modeled the seat similar to the arched styling of the hood panels, and they incorporated 2 fuel tanks into the seat, one on this side and one on that side. Those are the fuel caps there and there. And then the seat back had 2 rearward facing lights, and then that hard nose front grille had 2 forward facing lights. So those were kind of interesting and useful options. And another improvement they made was they went to a torque converter drive on the 2-star, along with a forward and reverse planetary. So that's your forward reverse pedal right there. Handy feature, you could just keep it in a straight gear, and with the tip of that pedal, you could change direction. And the steering was also streamlined, so each lever had a progressive clutch and brake actuation to it. They did not have brake pedals that you had to run like you had to do on X253. Of course, the prototype has a lever that just actuates each steering clutch and a pedal for each steering brake, whereas on the production 2-star, you would just pull a steering lever back, and the first half of travel would disengage the clutch, and then if you needed the brake, you just pulled it the rest of the way back, and that activated the brake. So it was a very progressive steering system. Pretty slick, really. One of the key design differences, though, between the prototype and the production 2-star is the length of the track frame. So, of course, X253 is set on the Caterpillar D2 undercarriage. They did that, I think, to save a lot of time. But for some reason, Cat just liked to have those shorter track bases under the smaller machines. And you can see where the 2-star had it stretched way out. So the front of the track is still not even on par with the back edge of the side panel. And if they would have kept that same footprint on the 2-star, the front of the track would have been like right there. So they stretched that out a long ways, and that gives you a lot more stable machine because it gets a lot of that up and down pitch out of it that happens at the nose. So that was definitely an upgrade, and I'm not sure why Cat stuck with those shorter frames for so long, but they did. But then again, you have to realize X253 was just a show pony, all right? Its sole purpose in life was for this meeting right here. They were trying to get the go-ahead from these investor guys to start into a crawler program, and they obviously got enough money that it got the green light, and Moline made several other prototypes after X253, I don't know how many for sure. I've heard as many as 4, but I do know that after X253, Moline used all of their own in-house built components, so we weren't pilfering pieces from Caterpillar or anyone else anymore. So even though X253 was not being built with performance in mind at all, they still had at least one key feature of the design in play on the prototype that they ended up using on the production crawler, and it's found under steering. It says entire steering clutch assembly can be removed from site of machine for servicing when required. And incidentally, this round cover right here that is kind of half tucked behind the drive sprocket, that is the tin cover that gives you access to the steering clutch for this side, and there's a matching one on the other side as well. So even on the prototype, they had that ease of steering clutch serviceability in mind with the build. So yeah, it was just going to be a showpiece, but they were already starting to put some of their ideas into play when they built that crawler. So probably a lot more stories like that too that could be shared, but at this point, most of those are lost to history as well. So I hope you all enjoyed the backstory of the infamous X253 Men in Suits archive photo. I can say that I would watch that movie if they made it, but then again, I'm not really right either, so there's that. Anyhow, work will resume on X231, and I hope to have another actual episode out in a couple days' time. So as usual, everyone, thank you for watching. It is always appreciated, and I hope to see you back again.